Well, hello. We are now in chapter 4, which is all about verbal elements of communication. In this chapter, we are going to look at how language works. We're going to look at the functions of language in communication. There's more to it than you think you know. The impact of language, types of language, and improving our verbal communication. Okay, so the first thing we need to know is, why do we say what we do? What is language? Well, we know that language is, of course, symbols. Symbolism. Who decided that shape of a line is going to represent a sound? But once we developed these languages, it became the most important element in human connection. We communicate using particular forms of spoken or written words or other symbols, but it doesn't matter what language we're speaking, we're still, have you noticed, using language. It's, of course, in discourse, it's spoken or written discussion of the subject. But let's look at some of the rules when it comes to language. I love this image. I like cooking, my family, and my pets. Use commas, don't be a psycho. It's absolutely true though, right? Have you noticed that people will text or post something and they don't use appropriate grammar or punctuation, and you're not sure what it is you're reading? It can be read in several different ways. That's actually why we have rules when it comes to language. So when it comes to the words and meaning, we have three different types of rules usually: semantic rules, syntactic rules, and pragmatic rules. Semantic rules are like the dictionary definition of the word. It's denotation kind of things. But we also have guidelines to determine the meaning of the words, the phrases, how we use sentences in language, and to help clarify how language conveys meaning and resolves ambiguities. The semantic rules would be like, okay, there's a difference between a diagram and a diaphragm. Okay, I had a student giving a speech, and she kept talking about, if you look at this diaphragm up here, and the entire class was giggling, but she meant to say diagram. Okay, words change, word usage changes. It has to do with the word itself. What does it mean? Semantic rules. If you've ever heard someone say, don't argue semantics with me. Are you hungry, or are you ravenous? Or are you could use a nosh. Semantic rules, how do we use the words that we use. Syntactic rules are the grammar, the structure, the punctuation. I like cooking, my family, and my pets. Okay, the syntactic rules are guidelines that govern sentence structure and the arrangements of words. As you know, we say like the blue shirt, but in Spanish it's the shirt of blue. Okay, we also know that in English we rarely have determiners, a, and, or the, other than those three. But we don't have something that goes in front of boy, girl, etc. But in other languages, they have different forms of the word that represent male, female, or neutral. And so, it determines how we are going to put words together, and the rules that govern them. The example I've got here, I'm trying to remember why I put it. It says, the chicken is ready to eat. The chicken is ready to eat. Ah, yes. Versus the chicken is ready to be eaten. Okay? The chicken is ready to eat. We say that all the time. We're calling people in for dinner. The chicken's ready to eat. Let's go. Except what does that really say? It's saying the chicken itself, cluck, 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 is ready to go outside and nibble at the grass and eat its dinner. So in linguistically speaking, syntactically speaking, the second one, the chicken is ready to be eaten, is more correct. And pragmatic rules are how we interpret messages based on our communication interaction. They're guidelines, okay, used in context to convey meaning and intent, but they can change based on, just common usage. Think of the word, let's find a word that's changed over time. The word gay. Okay, when I was a kid, it meant happy. It meant very happy. My sister, as you know, my maiden name is Frolic. which means happy. And my poor cousin, her mother named her Gay Frolic. So she just got made fun of all the time, happy, happy. And as she got older, of course, the word changed meaning. The world moved on, as you will. And it changed meaning. Gay started meaning something totally different altogether. And then when I was teaching high school first time around, I believe it was in 94, 95, 96, and the word gay meant, oh, that's stupid. So pragmatic rules, that's where you get a lot of the slang and things like that. But they still have rules that define them. Now, next, what we're going to look at is what do our words convey, okay? So our words create our reality, and they reflect our attitudes about things. Have you noticed we can definitely give an opinion based on words? If you think about it, the example I have is it a crowd versus a mob, okay? Mob indicates a negative reality, while a crowd just means a large grouping of people. So they also vary in abstraction. If you look at this ladder here, you have very abstract language up here. Information. Information can cover anything. I asked my other classes, they have to give an informational speech, and I really throw them off because that is such a huge word. So we can narrow the focus. Information becomes research, becomes academic fields. We're narrowing the focus. When you were putting together your topics for your group project, I told some of you, you might have to narrow the focus because you were giving me a very abstract term up here, when down here we can narrow the focus down to our class. This is an informational class. Yes, it has some research. If we narrow the focus to academic fields, and then humanities and social sciences, that's a large grouping underneath it. Communication studies down to this particular class, interpersonal communication, it's much more concrete. Okay, now let's talk about metacommunication. This is just a fun one. Metacommunication means communicating about communications. Let's have a talk about how we talk. That's a metacommunication. A meta-message is the meaning conveyed beyond the word itself, however. So when we're looking at meta-messages, we're actually looking at how we view a word. Denotative meaning versus connotative meaning. Denotative meaning is, of course, the word's dictionary or descriptive definition. You could look up a word in the dictionary and you can define it with very specific information, but your connotation is going to be your personal relationship with that word, okay? Some people love ice cream, and you ask them to define ice cream, they're going to give you all this wonderful, oh, it's so tasty and good, and it's cold, and it's made of milk, and it has elements of the denotation in there, but it's got more connotation, right? Because when you're saying it's lovely, it's good, when you put an opinion on a definition, it has become your connotative meaning. I have a great example, by the way, of this, and let's hope you can see it okay. Ooh, let me start it.
This is a DNA test. Who recognizes it? Coriander, yes. Cilantro. Who doesn't like cilantro? There they are. Does it taste like soap? Tastes like soap. Okay. Each of you has one letter different on chromosome 11. On chromosome 11 there is a gene. If you change one letter in this gene, then coriander will suddenly taste like soap. And before all the others now think, what mutants in the audience? Turns out we are the mutants. They have tested DNA of prehistoric men. Turns out the prehistoric men did not like coriander. There must have been a mutation somewhere in history, and this mutation spread out over the human race because of the evolutionary advantage of Thai takeaway food. And now we have people who like coriander and people who dislike coriander, and people who dislike coriander really dislike coriander. Every time I ask this question, the same thing happens. I asked who doesn't like coriander, and then this happens. It's a deep hate.
Okay, so you get the point. So when we're looking at, let me go back. So when we're looking at denotation versus connotation, the example he gave, of course, was coriander, which is the other name for cilantro, which is what most of us call it down here in South Texas. And if I were to ask you to define cilantro, some of you might just give me a denotative meaning. It's a plant, it's green, it's grown in certain places, it's used to spice or to add flavoring to different meals. That would be the denotation. Some of you would give me the connotation. It's that horrible stuff that tastes like soap, or, ooh, it's that good stuff that I love in everything I make. Connotative meaning. Okay, so let's move past him. I thought he was funny. I like his accent, though. So,
This is a
again. There we go. Now, what are some of the functions of language? We use it for instrumental and regulatory purposes, okay? Instrumental means to fulfill a need. You know, you have to ask somebody, I need gas on pump 3. Instrumental, okay? It's regulatory. To influence another's behavior. Hey, you, stop that. We all say that to our children, right? Hey, come here. You know, regulate their behaviors. Sometimes it's regulate our own. Could you hand me this? Could you get me this? Very basic uses of language there. Then we have the interactional and imaginative functions. The interactional helps form and maintain relationships, right? We don't have a relationship with someone without actually communicating with them in some way. I think it's adorable. My daughter's ex-boyfriend now, but at the time when they got together, they started dating and it was just very quick, but it actually wasn't, because they had been interacting non-verbally at work, you know, shooting each other with rubber bands and throwing paper at each other and stuff, but they never actually spoke for like a year and a half. And when they finally started speaking, they discovered common interest and they were into each other, if you will. And then you have your imaginative functions. These help create the imaginary constructs. They don't exist in the real world. You could call it daydreaming, but we do that all the time. I mean, look at movies, look at books, comic books, you know, the imaginative features of the world that we find so highly entertaining. Those are also functions of language. Now, the personal functions help individuals form your own identity, your sense of self. And then we have our ritual functions. These are the ones that are used out of habit. If someone says something to you that just captures your attention or doesn't, and like they yell across the quad, hi, and you just yell hi, and you don't even realize you said hi until afterwards. Just rituals, things that we always do. Bye, bye. My husband and I have gotten into this goofy thing. We saw it on TV where the guy was saying bye-bye. And so now I can't leave the house without him standing there, bye-bye. It's just, and half the time he doesn't realize he's even doing it. It's just a ritual function. The heuristic functions represent the problem solving that we get into when you're using language to analyze something and to learn from your discoveries. You can think of it as, you know, you've had an epiphany, your self-analysis, or you're analyzing something else and you're getting the information from it. And then, of course, the representational, because honestly, you have to have language to represent things. You know what this is, we know what it does, but if somebody says, what is that? I'd say a calculator. We have to have language to be able to describe the function of this item. Okay, moving on. We have cultural functions. Now, Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, I have a problem with it. I'm going to be honest. I just have a problem with it. But there is a theory, okay, that language impacts our perception of our worldview. And okay, the has had perspective. He had worked in Houston, suggests that he passed away. He has worked in Houston, suggests that he's still alive. Now, but do I feel like just using that language, has versus had, has really changed my perspective of the world or my worldview? I don't know about that. So linguistic relativity is the view that Language contains special characteristics that can influence one's emotions. Now, I can tell you in some ways that is true. I was having a meeting. It was my ex-husband and I and this man. We were going to buy some property, and he kept talking to my husband, and he kept looking at me and calling me little lady, and it was really starting to get on my nerves. My husband at the time saw that, and he says, because the man kept asking him for the financial information, he's like, look, if you want to sell this property, you talk to her. But the guy didn't get it. So now, was that a cultural thing? Was that, oh, we ended up walking away too. The man never stopped. He was highly irritating. Ugh. Anyway, so, but did the language, yes, it had special characteristics that kind of influenced me, but was that more of a cultural thing, or is that linguistic relativity? I have issues with the whole concept. Anyway, and then there's linguistic determinism, I can say the word, the perspective that language influences your thoughts. Does it influence your thoughts? Do you have the thoughts without the language? See, we can think in 600 to 800 words, if you will, per minute, but they're not really words, are they? Because when we're thinking, are they in actual words, or is it in images and concepts that just flash through our brain? Do you really have the words in there? When you're thinking of something and someone says, are you thinking about? Are the words just automatic, or do you have to find a way to phrase what you're thinking about? If we were thinking in words, we wouldn't have to have that moment of thought process, right? So I don't know. I have a problem with the safer word, but we're moving on now. How powerful are our words? They are quite powerful. I just gave you an indication of how I walked out on I think it was $45,000 land deal because the man could not accept that the little lady over here was the one in charge of the checkbook because it was the little lady's money. All right, and he just really got on my last nerves. So yes, it hit him in his pocketbook. This was back in 2000, so 45,000 cost a lot more then. Okay, but it also, language impacts other people, their emotions and our own, our name and our affiliation, of course. You know, we take pride in who we are, in our name, and who we are affiliated with in the world. But then we look at bias, sexism, and racism. We already know that these are hot button topics in society. Bias is, of course, attitudes that are not objective. They're all opinion, they're prejudiced, and they could be offensive to others. I don't think I have to define that any further for you. Sexism is biased against others based on their biological sex. That realtor who was trying to sell me property, okay, he never understood that he was being sexist. He had no idea he was being sexist, and I think he would have been quite shocked to learn later that what he did was really sexism. Some people don't even understand what harassment really means, okay? Then there's racism, bias against others based on their skin color. Now, we call it race. Is it really race? There's only one race. It's the human race. Race is a social construct created by societies to segregate and how they organize people in their thoughts. If you think about it, we have to organize our information. That's part of the perception process. And one of the steps is to organize information in our brain. And some people use skin color to do that. And when they talk about it, they call it race. Now, if we are biased against others because of their skin color, that's bad. It's called racism. And it can be quite powerful. But what kind of types of language do you use? Okay, there's formal language and informal language. If you think in terms of, it's called Bix and Kelp, and I'm going to draw it right here for you, and hopefully you'll be able to see it okay. If you look at it as a scale, Bix is on this side. It's basic interpersonal communication skills. Kelp is cognitive academic language proficiency. And you notice it's a scale. Bix would be the informal language. That's like, yo, hey, how's it going? And, or in as Joey would say on Friends, how you doing? And then formal is CALP. It's cognitive academic language proficiency. That's courtroom language. That's hello and how are you today? All right. So what kind of language do you use? Where does slang show up on your scale? Where does cussing show up on your scale? Where would school be on this scale? Now, honestly, I would say school is kind of right in the middle. Now, this is K through 12, and we get better. The more schooling you get, the more up you're going to go. You just never know, okay? You just never know. And then there's jargon, which is specialized or technical language associated with a very specific group in a professional context. And quite frankly, I don't understand most of the medicalese that they talk or the legalese, all of those things. I don't get it. I don't need to understand it. Do I understand the jargon related to education? Yes, I know what an IEP is. I know what a 504 is. I know what an accommodation is. Things like that. There is jargon specific to each field. And then colloquialisms, and that's how you say it, colloquialisms, are informal expressions used in casual conversation. They are sometimes related to dialects or geographic regions. I don't think people up north really use the word y'all. That's definitely a colloquialism to South Texas or the South under the Mason-Dixon line. So they say it all along the South. And we know the difference between y'all and y'all all and all y'all, right? We know the differences there. But what kind of language do you use? Do you use slang? Okay, I love this. You know what slang represents. Where did my pointer go? My pointer went away. There it is. Short language. Slang is actually slang for short language. Isn't that hilarious? Okay. We also have idioms. Now, idioms do not translate well into other languages. So say if you wanted to say, I can't even say it, blue sky thinking. We know that that means you're kind of daydreaming. Dead as a doornail. Does that even make sense? How is a doornail dead? It's just sitting there. Is that what that means? If we were to actually try to translate it into another language, it wouldn't make any sense. Stop. That car could stop on a dime. We're not laughing at you. We're laughing with you. That's an idiom. It doesn't translate well into other languages. And then there's the cliche. The words that are said all the time that become buzzwords. You've heard the phrase buzzwords. And cliche, buzzwords get old after a while. For a long time, when I was a much younger educator, I loved the phrase, let's think outside the box. Because for me, that was a fairly new concept. And I don't think inside a box anyway. I'm over here saying, where's the box? But think outside the box. But now you hear it said in a meeting and it's just old. It's like, oh, I've heard that so many times. How many phrases have you heard that you were tired of hearing? They've become cliche. Everybody says it. It doesn't have meaning anymore. And then we have improper language, which of course is vulgarity and cursing. Vulgarity is language that's offensive, lacks good taste. Cursing, you already know what that is. Have you ever noticed that cursing and vulgarity is usually related to bodily functions? I wonder why that is. You might want to do some research on that. And then biased language is language showing preference in favor of a certain point of view, showing prejudice. Okay, we try not to use biased language. That crowd versus mob thing again. Which one is it? That same ex-husband used to call me his old lady, and I hated that because he was older than me. And I used to always hear him say, that's my chick. A chick is small, fuzzy, and cheap. I am not. So, biased language. And then spin. It's a manipulation of language to achieve a most positive interpretation of words. Think about every news source out there. They all use biased language and they all have spin. They all gear their language towards a certain perspective. And that's what spin does. Some other forms of improper language, you've got ambiguous language that it could mean anything. Abstract, it may be that you have multiple definitions here, so you don't know exactly what you're saying. A euphemism is considered improper language. It's mild, indirect, a vague term, and it gives you some examples here because I figured that one might be a little difficult. But it's a way of saying something more politely or less bluntly, but it's still kind of an idiom. He's a little thin on top instead of going bald, homeless instead of bum. You get the idea. Relative language is language that gains understanding only by comparing it to something else. When people try to compare two things, relative language, sometimes it works, sometimes it's inappropriate and it's improper. And then static evaluations. Static evaluations indicate that people and things don't change over time. My notes say that they do change over time, but they don't. A static evaluation means this is the way you are and this is the way you will be forever. I used to call my brothers stupid. Why? Because I was their sister. It's what siblings did. But I would say, you're so stupid. But that's a static evaluation, right? Because is he going to continue to be stupid forever and ever? Amen. Well, one of my brothers is quite smart. Another one is quite smart, although emotionally not all the way there. And you get the point. We change over time. So that would be a static evaluation. He's an idiot, or he's stubborn as a mule. So an idiom and a static evaluation all at one time. Now, how do you improve your verbal communication? Well, we already know that vocabulary has been proven statistically and through studies as a predictors of one's social status, your education, and your profession. We know that the more educated you get, the higher level of vocabulary you tend to use. And so one thing that you can absolutely do is improve your vocabulary skills. Use words by repetition. We used to have, and I don't know if they still have them, and I would love to have one now, is a word of the day. If you use a new word and you use it 10 times, you've incorporated it into your vocabulary and you've expanded your knowledge base. That's how I learned the word discombobulate. I still wonder, if you can be discombobulated, can you get recombobulated? Look that up. Tell me what you think. So group similar words together, build your vocabulary, read. Reading is the best way to build your vocabulary, but if you're not sure how a word is pronounced, I love it. You can look things up on these little gadgets now, and they will pronounce it for you. So that's one way to improve your verbal communication, but how overall can you improve your communication skills? Well, increase your awareness and adaptation of your language. Understand that we can all get better as we are learning. Okay, we get better every single day, and I learn new words still, and I'm pretty darned up there when it comes to language. So look for your language awareness, language adaptation. Okay, if you hear a new word, take it in, write it down, whatever you need to do, and then check for understanding. If someone said something you're not clear, you can talk first. You say, this is what you were saying, and I'm not sure if I understood what you meant, and then actively listen to their response, and you will get better with your language. Now, if you have any questions about any of this material, please, please, please let me know. And I believe that was the end, yes it is, of our slideshow. So I am going to end this video, and I will see you guys next video. Bye.